Hello and a very good evening, good afternoon or even good morning. On this edition of Straight Talk here at WION World is One, we are joined by Sri Lanka's Energy Minister, Attorney at Law, Udaya Gammanpila. How are you doing, Mr. Gammanpila?
These days, of course, struggling to survive.
As we speak, the entire island nation is staring at a power crisis. We've had generators that failed from power complexes shutting down to even the CEB going to the extent of issuing a scheduled power cut timetable. But how did this issue, a necessity as important as electricity, be so last minute of a plan here in the country, and why didn't the relevant ministries, or rather the government, not have a backup plan?
So, first of all, I must mention that in Sri Lanka, I am the Minister of Energy. There is a separate cabinet ministry for electricity, known as Ministry of Power. So, power generation is within the purview of that ministry. But as a cabinet minister, I must explain the situation. Usually in Sri Lanka, annual demand for power grows 8% by 8% per annum. Periodically, government has to introduce new power plants to meet the demand. Unfortunately, since 2014, there was no addition to our power plant, the family of power plants. That is why, as long as we had usually from January to April is a dry season in Sri Lanka, most part of Sri Lanka. As a result, our water reservoirs, water level drastically go down. During that time, we heavily depend on thermal power plants to meet the electricity demand. Unfortunately, since we did not add either renewable energy or thermal energy to our grid during the last 8 years, now existing thermal power plants are not in a position to meet the entire power demand in the country. So that's one issue. So I have predicted that there must be definite power cuts from early March, probably from mid-February.
Is this because the country is unable to source the necessary dollars?
Our power plants have no capacity to, our thermal power plants, because now water levels are going down.
Yes.
So drought would be more severe
in the coming months.
In the coming months, as a result, at the moment, if you look at the figures, by December, 60% or in November, 65% of power requirement was met with hydro.
Right.
Now it has come down to 25%. Then the demand should be looked after by the thermal power plants. But unfortunately, since we have not added new power plants to our system, existing thermal power plants have no capacity to meet the demand. So that is the problem I am foreseeing in the near future. The present problem is not so. Now, hydropower generation is slowly coming down. With that, we have to increase the demand, increase the power production with thermal power plants. For that, of course, we need diesel and furnace oil. Presently, let me explain the problem. Presently, our monthly export income is around $1,000 million. Out of this $1,000 million, we receive only $750 million to our banking system because of the prevailing exchange rate. There is a huge black market. As a result, we get to around $750 million. Present our fuel bill, that is only for transportation and industrial purposes, is around $400 million. We need another $100 million to meet the demand of the power sector. Then all in all, we need $500 million out of $750 million to meet the energy requirement of the country. So in other words, 2/3 of our export income must be dedicated for importation of petroleum products. That is something we can't really bear, because we are in a foreign currency crisis at the moment. With this, in this backdrop, we are not in a position to afford such a huge allocation for importation of the petroleum products. That's why we are facing this difficulty.
But it also seemed as if the Ministry of Power, along with the Ministry of Energy, was sort of having some friction between each other, because this sort of seemed to be very last minute, if you recall.
It was ugly. It shouldn't have happened. Whatever the problems, we should have discussed within our office rooms, because we are colleagues of the very same cabinet. Unfortunately, when CEB had to go for power cuts, they put the blame on the Petroleum Corporation. So as the minister in charge of the Petroleum Corporation, I had to come forward and defend the corporation. But let me explain what happened. As you know, firstly, we have to get the allocation of the hardly pressed foreign currency for importation of the petroleum products. Secondly, there is a very strict procurement procedure to follow as a government institute. Because of these two reasons, we had requested the Electricity Board, as you know, the CEB, to inform us that their requirement well in advance. That was our first request. Secondly, we said, we are already pressed with procuring dollars for our own importation. If you want any, please arrange dollars as well, because we can't find any more, because it's very great difficulty. Only we find the required 400 million for every single month. So that was two requests we have given orally as well as in writing. On 7th of January, the CEB informed us that they want 1,500 metric tons of furnace oil from 8th onwards. The request was made on 7th, from 8th onwards, but fortunately we had enough stocks with us, so we immediately started to supply them. On 11th of January, they again said we need 1,500 metric tons of diesel from 13th.
But why are they so last minute?
They should have planned this well in advance. We have warned them about this situation since last September, orally at our stock review meetings, for which of course CEB will also participate. In addition to that, I have written to the chairman of the Petroleum Corporation has written to the CEB chairman. Similarly, my ministerial secretary wrote to her counterpart, and I wrote to my counterpart. So all document evidence are available. So they should come forward and explain why they failed to inform us well in advance for us to follow the procurement procedure, as well as to arrange the much needed foreign currency.
So the million-dollar question really is, who is to blame for this power crisis?
The facts are before you. Why don't you decide rather than putting me in a trouble?
Also, you've mentioned, because we are looking at a shortage in the coming months, especially after March, that in the event we don't secure a sufficient enough loan to procure the much needed fuel, and when we do head into a shortage, that if we sort of look into a process of rationing fuel, the transportation sector would be given priority as opposed to that of electricity. But don't you think this is a little unrealistic and bizarre?
No, not at all. There is a specific reason. Now, power sector is a control sector. Now, Electricity Board can announce, we will provide electricity for 24 hours, 1 hour power cut, 2 hour power cut, 3 hour power cut, so on. But in transportation sector, either you have fuel at the fuel pumping station or you don't have fuel at the fuel pumping station. There is no situation in between. There you can control to different degrees. Here only two extremes, either you have or have not. Because of that, supplying fuel to transportation sector is extremely crucial, because imagine a situation there is no fuel at the fuel pumping stations. Doctors can't reach the patients, patient can't go to the hospitals, police officers can't go to the rioting places, and everybody can move. Only your walking distance, or if you have a bicycle, you are lucky. So then country would be anarchical. There would be no government. People will come to the street and they would riot. So cutting electricity for an hour or two is a situation people are used to in the past, as well as they somehow with great difficulty. They may blame the government, but they would bear. But when they lose their mobility to reach their essential services, imagine a situation, these janitorial services can't reach their workplaces, then the local authorities are not in a position to remove garbage. Can you imagine a country like that? Therefore, transport sector must be prioritized over supplying petroleum to power sector. So I explained this bitter truth. So therefore, I said, I have already arranged required foreign currency for importation of the petroleum products for the transportation and industrial sectors. It was a great difficulty. You may recall, leader of the opposition, former Prime Minister, and most of the opposition MPs predicted the imminent fuel shortage as early as in June 2021. For last 8 months, with great difficulty, somehow we have ensured the uninterrupted supply of fuel. But I can't get another burden all of a sudden. But if they give me due notice, then of course we can arrange it. So that's what happened. That shouldn't have happened, but unfortunately we had a bitter experience. So I think that bitter experience is over. So, but my own assessment, I feel there would be around shortage of 300 megawatts, the demand and supply. So
for how long would this shortage be in your predictions?
Until the next rainy season, which would start in mid-April.
Right. Also, as a strong man and as an icon representing the current government, you yourself have voiced your opposition regarding certain decisions. And at a point, we did see the president make a strong remark that if there are ministers within his government who oppose certain decisions, they must duly resign. Do you think this comment was made sort of aiming at you?
I don't know. You should pose this question to the president to find the ultimate truth about it. But a lot of people had suspected that he was making that remark at me. But I responded saying, I have not done anything wrong, so I'm not going to resign. But I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm at the discretion of the president. So if he feels I have done something wrong, he would have sacked me at any time. I'm ready for it. Because whatever I did according to my conscience, and moreover, according to my mandate. Let me explain this. Because people may think, how this man survived despite all these mischievous actions. We have, let me vouch for me, I have talked against the government only in two different types of occasions. Firstly, when the government acts against its mandate, of course I have a right to oppose it, because in July 2020, during the election campaign, Minister Vimal Veerwansa and I signed a joint pledge, it's a public pledge, stating we will be the opposition within the government to ensure that government would stick to its mandate. Because presidential election manifesto is the contract between the government and the people. So government should stick to that. If government is going to deviate from the mandate, they should come before the people and justify their action. So that's why we oppose the 20th Amendment. Secondly, giving ECT, Eastern Container Terminal of Colombo Port, to the Indian Adani Group, because those are against the specific mandate received by our government. Then we criticized the government at the New Fortress Energy deal because we didn't have the opportunity to express our views at the cabinet meeting.
And recently, Sri Lanka did give the green light for the Trincomalee oil tank farm to be jointly developed with India. But this has been a discussion that has been going on for nearly 2 decades, let's say 19 years at least. What really gave the green light now at this point, and why did it take so long?
Indians wanted to have the entire 99 tanks in their control. So they wanted Sri Lankan government to lease out all 99 tanks to them, then sublease to Sri Lankan entities who want to use these tanks. So when I became the minister, I realized that India's interest is not commercial, but it's a security concern. This oil tank farm has 100 tanks with a capacity of 10,000 metric ton each. So we can store oil of 8 million barrel of oil in this tank farm. If an enemy of India is in possession of these tanks, that enemy can attack India without any break because of the uninterrupted fuel supply to their ships, planes and submarines. So this is India's worry. So they don't want to develop this. If they, my own assessment, right? If they can bomb and destroy this, their problem is over. This is their headache. So I realized this. Then I agreed with them. Well, we will not get third party involved in development of these tanks without Indian consent. That's what they exactly wanted. So I rephrased, because India wants entire 99 tanks under their control. Sri Lanka is not ready to accept that situation or that position. Because of that, nothing moves ahead. So I changed there was a frame, because that frame doesn't fit like a square peg in a round bottle kind of thing. So I changed the shape of the peg to fit the bottle. So that's what I did. So our counter proposal was acceptable to India. It was, of course, a tough negotiations. We had 22 rounds of negotiations during the period of 16 months. So there were heated exchanges, so a lot of issues. So somehow in the end, we were able to reach consensus. Now, entire tank farm going to be used first time after the Second World War.
Also, speaking of India as a country, has been a close ally, especially to the Ministry of Energy when it comes to even providing much needed petrol and even lines of credit when it comes during these dire times. How would you describe the Sri Lanka-India relationship like?
Oh, well, we like it or not, India is our one and only border sharing neighbor. So our relationship is very historical. So our relationship is heavily influenced by our history. On the one hand, most of our cultural roots are there, our religious roots are there. In my case, I have only two heroes, both are Indians, Gautama Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi. So most of Sri Lankans dream to visit India and see the places important to Buddhists, such as the Lord Buddha's birthplace, the place he attained nirvana, and those such important places. So there's a very strong cultural bond between Sri Lanka and India. But time to time, this relationship goes ups and downs. But like brothers, we fight. But despite we fight, brothers are brothers.
Also, when we speak of Indian interest, this whole topic of the 13th Amendment comes into play. And what is your view of the 13th Amendment? And recently, we did see that you did voice your opposition once again regarding the fact that a few Tamil MPs had written to the Indian Prime Minister. You weren't quite a fan of what they did. What can you say about that?
I was very vociferous against 13th Amendment. But in this particular instance, these Tamil parties were invited by then President Mahinda Rajapaksa to participate in a parliamentary select committee to deliberate the power devolution in Sri Lanka. They boycott. They didn't want to make their contribution. Instead, to date, they have never sought an opportunity to discuss about the 13th Amendment with this government. But instead, they were writing to the Indian government. That's why I reminded them that Sri Lanka is not a part of India or a colony of India. If they have an issue, they should discuss with the Sri Lankan government instead of Indian government. Am I correct or am I wrong? What do you think?
We'll leave it for the audience. Also, recently we also did see the visit of the Chinese foreign minister, and during this visit, something that really came up was debt restructuring. How do you think Sri Lanka and China will go on its course, really, when it comes to debt restructuring?
Until recent past, I think until 2012, Japan was the biggest creditor to Sri Lanka. But now, China is the biggest creditor, and China accounts for 10% of the loans borrowed by Sri Lanka. So it is, if we want to restructure our debt, engaging with China is paramount. So that's why we initiated that discussion with the Chinese government when Chinese foreign minister visited Sri Lanka. Their initial response was quite encouraging. We are hopeful that they would help us to restructure our loans. The bulk has been borrowed from the multilateral agencies such as ADB, World Bank, and IMF. But there is, if you look at the country, then China is the first, Japan is the second. So without talking to China and Japan, we can't restructure our loans. So that's why we decide to engage with those countries.
Also, the other question that I think citizens as a whole in this country has is, what is this government's immediate plan to get out of this crisis? We are not only looking at a fuel crisis, we're looking at a possible food shortage and a lot of other crises that we are to expect in the coming months. And no official representing the government has come forward and said, this is our plan, this is how we plan to get out of this mess. Why is that, or what is the plan really?
We expect the government to formulate and make it public as at its earliest within a few weeks. If it doesn't happen, a G10 group of 10 parties are now working on alternative proposals. We will so if the government do not explain what are we going to do to come out of this crisis, people will be desperate. Then when people are ready to bear these hardships, if they know they have to bear these hardships only for 6 months, 1 year, even for 3 years, if they know definitely, okay, this is only for 3 years, thereafter you have a better life, they are ready to bear it. I have 5 steps. Firstly, we must admit that we are in a crisis. Unfortunately, time to time we hear there is no such crisis, this is a myth, don't worry about it, kind of a statements. But truth may be bitter, but truth is the truth. So we must admit this bitter truth. We are in a crisis. Unless we admit the fact that we are in a crisis, we will never compel to find a solution. Why should we look for a solution when we are not in a crisis? Secondly, we should explain this crisis with facts and figures, because ours is an educated population, they can understand it. Thirdly, we should explain our solutions. What is our program to come out of this problem? Fourthly, we should give a time frame. Then only people will get the confidence. Fifthly, during the difficult time, we should set examples to the people. We should not preach how to face the difficulties, but we should practice what we preach. If we follow these 5 steps, we can, as a nation, jointly, entire nation can work together and defeat this crisis the very same manner we defeated separatist terrorism.
So you do believe that politicians are practicing what they preach?
That's why I said, if we do so.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Gammanpila.
Thank you.